Okay, so hello and welcome everybody. Um, I'm not sure how to see people, whether how many people are in the room or who is here, so I'll just start us off right away. Um, so hello, welcome, Segu, Gwe. My name is Wahi Gatste or Wahi. I come from the community of Ganawage, just south of Montreal. I'm part of the Ganyakahaga Nation, the Mohawk Nation, within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Iroquois Confederacy. But today I'm calling from London, England, so a bit of a twist today, but very happy to be joined by some hard hitters today. So I'll let everybody do a round of introductions, and then we'll hop right into some great questions. So maybe we'll start with MJ, Tamer, and then James.
Yes, thank you so much, Wahi. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. So my name is Marie-Josée. You can call me MJ. And I work as Senior Director in Outcomes Finance at Raven Indigenous Capital Partners. I work from Jojage, Montreal, and I am of Mi'kmaq Acadian heritage.
I guess I'm next. Oh, hi everyone. It's nice to see you all. So, my name is Tamar Brahim, and I'm with the Definity Insurance Foundation, and I'm calling from Treaty 13, the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. So, Toronto. I'm a first generation immigrant. My family came to Toronto in 1989. I was born in Egypt in a region in Cairo called Helwan, and my mom comes from a small town called Maadi, and her family is of Coptic and Greek descent, and my father is from Luxor. I was baptized Coptic Orthodox, which is a minority Christian denomination that makes up about 10% of the Egyptian population, which has been under significant religious persecution. And it's one of the reasons why my family came here. But that's a little bit about me, and it's nice to see you all.
Good morning, everybody. It's very nice to be here. I'm James Jenkins. I'm the Executive Director of Indigenous Clean Energy, and I'm a member of Walpole Island First Nation, Adjajak, the Crane Clan, and I'm here in my traditional territory, here in southwestern Ontario. At Indigenous Clean Energy, we primarily provide services to develop the leadership and capacity of Indigenous communities and businesses, and to advocate for their participation in the clean energy transition. So it's very nice to be here. Thank you. Thanks, Wahi, and everyone.
Fantastic. So before we start off with some questions, I just want to introduce kind of the idea and the stream of Indigenous finance within the Social Finance Forum and how essential this conversation and the communities we work with, the people and the families and the nations we work with and for are within social finance. And it's not one consideration within this ecosystem. We are a pillar. We are at the foundation of not only the national economy, but the national social finance economy. And we have a lot of rich stories to tell. And I'm sad we only have 50 minutes here today, but we'll try our best to kind of shine a light on some of the great successes of partnerships and work happening on the ground and investments happening in communities from coast to coast to coast. So first, I'll start with MJ. So we are at Raven together. Very, very grateful for our wonderful team and the work that we're doing both with capital partners on the fund side with venture capital, as well as the Indigenous Impact Foundation that we're working with, doing outcomes finance work. So today we're going to focus on outcomes finance work, which is really focused on community investment. And MJ, maybe if you can talk a little bit about the health portfolio that you lead at Raven, and a bit more about the initiatives that are at the forefront of that outcomes finance work, and maybe a little bit how working in Indigenous health projects in communities and investing in Indigenous health projects in communities is unique from necessarily a mainstream or non-Indigenous health project, and just kind of I'll let you add all the colors and flavors that you do.
Thank you, Wahi. Yes, happy to share some of the work that we've been doing for years now at Raven, and that is starting to come alive, I want to say. First, I want to specify that what we've been working with is a financial instrument that we call community-driven outcomes contract. And I'm sure many of you are aware of outcomes contracts, but in a nutshell, it allows for capital to flow into community and for community to design interventions that will tackle challenges that they've decided is what they need to work on and they want to solve, and for government to come in and pay for success. So purchase the outcomes that we agree upon together as being the success of the interventions. And in this case, we're working in health, and specifically in the reduction of type 2 diabetes in 4 communities in northern Manitoba with the Anishinaabe Nation. So we're working with Garden Hill First Nations, Wasagamok First Nations, St. Teresa Point First Nations, and Red Sucker Lake First Nations. An amazing partnership and people that have put their heart's energy and mind into this project. We're working on a project that is planned to last 3 years of interventions with 800 participants, divided proportionally into 4 communities, and working with the best practice in health coaching, but embedded in traditional culture. So we're embracing the 2ICing approach, having the best of Western practices and the best of traditional practices embedded together to really create interventions that speak to the local culture, speak to the people, and responds to their needs, their immediate needs, and also foresees wellness in the future. So in the work that we're doing, we're supporting health coaching approach, which means, having to create bespoke programs that will work for community, again, using traditional and Western knowledge together, so that we have health coaches that are hired from community supporting our participants, developing life-changing, lifestyle-changing approach. So what we are looking for is, working in improving physical activity, improving access to a healthy food, and then day-to-day practice of how do I cook healthy food? How do I integrate that in my daily routine? How do I transform how I eat so it benefits my body, my soul, and my relationship to community and to my culture? We're working on building healthy hubs, knowing that these interventions are, bespoke, and we're going to have health coaches working one-on-one with participants, but this needs to also happen somewhere. We need a gathering place, and we need a place also where people that are not necessarily part of a program can also join. It is community-based, and community have mentioned many times, we want a place where we can all benefit from this. It's extremely important that we create a place that unites everybody around well-being, around rediscovering practices that will support the well-being of community and the individuals participating. And with that, we're working on introducing an app that will follow participants one-on-one. So a piece of technology where when you have drafted your objectives on how you want to transform your lifestyle, how you want to increase your healthy habits, you can follow your success and look at what you've said to yourself that you wanted to achieve, and see where you're at in the day, in the week, in the month, in the year, and really be able to track yourself and be accountable, and then share with your support groups, with your health coach, with your friends, how you're doing. And I think something I want to mention in this approach is we're looking at supporting success for everybody, which means also recognizing that sometimes it's not easy. And it's not about meeting your goals every single time. It's about recognizing that sometimes it's not going to be a good week. And through that, we're embracing a Mino Bimadzuin approach. So living the good life, really looking at wellness in a holistic way that is embedded in traditional culture. So that's a little bit the type 2 diabetes reduction project that we're working on. And if I can, there's specific things I wanted to point out in this context. I think something that I want to emphasize is how everything is co-designed with community, how everything is co-decided, and how elders and knowledge keepers are at the core of the project. To us, it's clear that without that, it wouldn't work. It's at the core of what we foresee being really what will bring success to the initiative, and also that everything that we build will be owned by community. So we're respecting OCAP principles. For people who are not familiar with OCAP, it's ownership, control, access, and possession of data, but also of initiatives. So in our context, the Healthy Hubs will be owned by community, managed by community, and to us, that's extremely important. And when I say everything is co-designed, I want to just point to one specific project that started the whole initiative, which is the Indigenous Solutions Lab. So when we work on a deal, when we work on a project, we start by bringing together experts from many different areas of expertise. But again, with having community at the core of the conversation to really look at what needs to be done and build the backbone of the interventions and the projects that we're going to be leading. And everything we've been doing in Minoya in the type 2 diabetes reduction initiative starts from the Indigenous Solutions Lab. It's a really important piece of work that grounds the co-design and the vision for the project.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, MJ. You did a fantastic job at kind of synthesizing so many years of hard work by so many people at so many different levels. So kudos for the for being so concise. And I think maybe one point that I really want to pull from this example is that, that in certain community investments, there's negotiables and there's non-negotiables. And usually when it comes to Indigenous programming or Indigenous investments, the non-negotiables are dictated by governments or by grantors that don't necessarily respond to the needs of the people living in community and the people receiving kind of the benefits of said investment. So I think in this case, what Raven is trying to do and what you're trying to lead and be very authentic to is that the non-negotiables are decided by community in terms of what they need, what they want to own, what their vision of the future of their community is, and then the kind of we make the investment tool and vehicle and investor community really respond to those rather than the other way around. So thank you for that. And now maybe I'll shift focus to James. So moving from health into more of a climate lens, ICE is obviously, and I want to recognize the fantastic work that you've done kind of at all levels on the ground, behind the scenes, within securing investments. So kind of just the whole, your whole package deal, I would say. And just kind of thinking about, what types of investments are you dealing with at the community level? And what are some tools and strategies that have allowed you to be successful in kind of getting those investments and making those investments work on the ground? And as well as even pointing out maybe some challenges of those different types of investments as well. So I'll let you go ahead.
Well, thanks very much, Wahi, and thanks for the kind words. So just to add some context, over the last couple decades, Indigenous organizations have led hundreds of clean energy projects in wind and solar. So even preceding where we are now, from my own perspective, before I joined ICE, I was leading several large wind projects in my own community. And I could see what an economic driver it was within my own world. And it was only when I got into consulting and more into national work that I saw this is something happening in every province and territory. So the result of this work is Indigenous organizations, communities, businesses now collectively represent the third largest owner of energy assets in Canada after governments and utilities. So now we're at a stage with the US and Europe committing to investing significantly over the coming years in the clean energy transition. And with Canada following suit with the federal budget, we're really poised to see the level of investment generally in clean energy expand exponentially. So really our hope is that the factors and what we're advocating for is the factors that have allowed for Indigenous participation and in clean energy up until now continue, and they're scaled up. Because really that's become the expectation in different jurisdictions in Canada, that there will be this level of Indigenous participation. And from my own perspective, I see us as gradually moving away from what was a court-developed Crown duty to consult that really brought Indigenous communities to the table on many of these large clean energy projects. And that's really shifted to other kinds of partnerships. So now equity partnerships and participation are more the gold standard. And moving ahead of that, we're seeing more co-management and expectation of leadership in these projects from the Indigenous communities. So there are a number of obstacles, and one that probably a person hears about the most. Many Indigenous communities are affected in some way by the Indian Act, which presents some peculiarities when it comes to investing in Indigenous organizations, whether that's the community or a business located in the community. It doesn't affect every Indigenous organization, but it affects many of them. And the result is that on the surface, there appears to be an obstacle when it comes to securing capital. But I would point to the hundreds of large projects that have gone ahead, and I would make the case that those challenges have in many ways been overcome through structural arrangements, legal arrangements between the partners, and to look at those examples as a way to move forward. But I do see that on the ground as being a potential risk factor where red flags could be raised from a project management team, from a partner, whether that's on the legal side or somewhere else. And it can pose a risk to the project. So I think it's important to celebrate success so that we can overcome some of those initial challenges. And a really critical factor, and something that we advocate for at our core in ICE, is that there's sustained leadership and capacity within the Indigenous partner. And that was something I experienced personally at Walpole Island First Nation. In Ontario, there were some opportunities under different procurement programs, feed and tariff in particular, for Indigenous communities to take the lead on projects. Really what separated those that were successful from those that weren't was the ability to have that leadership within the community to overcome all of the various barriers. And I think some investors have recognized that, and we certainly recognize that at ICE as being a core factor of success. One of the things that's talked about quite a bit today is the need for a loan guarantee program. And part of that speaks to those structural difficulties when it comes to accessing capital from an Indigenous perspective. So Ontario does have a program, and some other jurisdictions like Alberta and Ontario, and there are some voices asking for a federal program. I would say, though, having had personal experience in Ontario and exposure to the other, even when those programs aren't accessed, I do think they bring parties together. So I have seen some success there. It's a way to envision what financing may look like. And generally the idea is, how do we get past the riskiest phase of the project? And that could be the regulatory phase. I'm probably running out of time. So one last thing I want to touch on that really came to me when it came to this project. I do want to say, we're really expanding our learning and impact side when it comes to evaluating what our work in clean energy is bringing into communities from a community perspective. Because I can tell you from my own perspective, the economic benefits alone allowed my community to go from cash flow management mode, barely delivering services under its obligations to the federal government, to with just in the span of a few years, with partnerships with large projects, we were able to, as a community, choose what was important to us, what we needed to invest in for our long-term future. So that has an immeasurable impact, and is probably some of the most important work I've ever done. So we're wondering and looking into different ways to evaluate those impacts, because they are important. I just wanted to touch on those areas. So I think looking in the future, we're focused on the demand side of energy as well. So that includes sustainability of housing, sustainability of long-term structures, and that has some crossover to health impacts as well. So we're looking at those with some other agencies. What we're talking about here is the prevalence of unsustainable housing in Indigenous communities leads to poor health outcomes through poor air circulation, mold, but also very commonly to a shortening of the life cycle of those assets. And what you hear communities screaming for is we have so much pressure on our housing stock, so much pressure to build. The reality is the housing stock is becoming compromised before the expected life cycle of the assets. So we are trying to bring all of these conversations together. And it does seem like the future solution is going to involve a heavy degree of investment, and it can't be led by government alone. It's going to include a significant amount of private investment. So in the future, we're looking at that as a major need. As we look at electrification, it really can't happen without addressing the demand side. And in terms of what exists across so many Indigenous communities, it's an area with so much return on investment when it comes to addressing those outcomes that are so common. So I'll just leave you with those thoughts. Thank you very much for your time and listening.
Thank you, James. And if I can tie maybe some things together, I think definitely ICE and Raven work in similar ways, but also in their own spaces and in unique ways as well. But similarly, in that we take a very holistic look, I believe, not only at kind of issues like health and climate being so similar, being interconnected, and of course the community knows this on the ground. They know, when the housing stock is poor and is struggling, that the people who are living in that house are also experiencing those negative effects of that. So I think part of it's seeing issues from a holistic lens and an interconnected lens, but also seeing kind of the whole design of an investment and a project and the execution of that in a holistic lens, and seeing that while there are really real challenges in communities, like facing the Indian Act and legal challenges, as well as kind of different types of trauma happening in our community, and different types of climate crises, that equally there's so much strength in the community, there's so much ingenuity in the community, there's so much resilience in the community, and a lot of times people are only seeing kind of the challenges or the obstacles and seeing investments as risky, when really there's so much kind of beauty and strength and richness, and success is already happening on the ground in both climate, health, and beyond. So I think if I can link maybe you and MJ together, and our two organizations together on that, I think that's maybe a common thread, is that holistic lens. So a bit of a pivot now, Tamer, and maybe I'll let you introduce a little bit about what Definity is about, where you are, kind of how you're feeling in the space as the new foundation. And I'd also like to add that Definity has been a fantastic partner to Raven. I would definitely consider us not only colleagues, but also friends at this point. And along this journey, and you've worked at Definity, but you've also worked at Laidlaw, and you've been in this kind of social finance space for a while. Just some thoughts around kind of best practices and lessons learned in investing in Indigenous projects, investing with Indigenous groups and organizations, and kind of, lessons learned along the way, and best practices that you can share.
Yeah, no, and I just want to, of course, and thank you, Wahine, for having me today. And I just want to acknowledge, of course, James and MJ for their outstanding work. I don't think I'll be that long, because Definity is a startup foundation. We're just so brand new. But I think this, but before I started in philanthropy, I think it was about 10 years ago, I was initially this compliant fundraiser for a grassroots organization, and throughout the time, I familiarized myself with the nuances of grant writing, proposal pitching, reporting, and donor stewardship, just really trying to understand the ebb and flow of these essential elements to raise money for this small grassroots organization. And at the time, I was really unaware, and it seemed maybe even the philanthropic sector as a whole was only just beginning to realize that those who were most in need of resources, especially Indigenous communities, often face barriers to accessing them. And then it also became increasingly evident that the systems and methods by which we provide capital and grants is quite obviously colonial, and should not be the sole approach employed in philanthropy. And so after spending 8 years at Laidlaw, I can confidently say that the organization's staff and culture served as a valuable learning hub for me, because it provided an environment where I could deeply understand the systemic inequities present in philanthropy and actively work towards unlearning those ingrained rules to bring about meaningful change. And so the focus of Definity is to tackle the root cause of inequity to support thriving communities. So if you visit our website today, you'll see that really reflects our current state as a startup foundation. There's some information because we're still so focused on understanding and defining our priorities, but ultimately our objective is to tackle the root causes of socioeconomic health and climate-related inequities. So our CEO, R.T. Freeman, she joined in February of last year after the foundation was created as part of the agreement to demutualize the economical insurance company. And as part of that process, $100 million was set aside to establish the Definity Insurance Foundation. And RT, with the support from the board, focused to operate the foundation as a relational grant maker, trying to steer away from the charitable model of philanthropy and trying to embrace more of a justice model instead. And then in the fall of 2022, we granted over $7 million to Black, Indigenous, and other equity-deserving groups, which of course include Raven, the Arctic Indigenous Fund, the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund, Gaagi Zagabaga, or GZ, which is in Northern Ontario, and they focus on food sovereignty, as well as the Northern Manitoba Food Culture and Community Collaborative. And that's just philanthropic granting. I think, you talk with our team and our board. Definity wants to go beyond granting dollars. Like, our aim is to leverage all our capital to drive our work forward. So we're not just focused on being, a grant maker with funds. Our purpose is to address inequity in a variety of forms of capital, like through our people, our grants, and then our network, and even beyond that. We acknowledge that we're still in a learning process and we don't have all the answers, but we're continuously moving forward and growing, and that continuous learning and growth, I think, should be the prevailing climate within the space foundations should occupy. Maybe I'll leave it there for now, Wahi, so we can carry on the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tamer. And if I can illuminate, I think, some pillars of what makes our relationship between Raven and Definity so valuable and so rich, is that I think that you walk the talk when it comes to certain values in Indigenous community investments that we work on together. And that would be that I think you, one, recognize you're on a learning journey. You recognize you don't know it all. You are not afraid to make mistakes or to walk cautiously with intention. I also think that you're quite patient with us, and we're quite patient with each other. We don't want to get things done right away by a certain timeline in a certain way and stick to a certain structure. We want to say, let's get to know one another. Let's be in relationship with one another. Let's see where we can meet. Let's see how we can coexist in the space. Let's see how we can enrich each other in the space. And I think another thing is that you're also fine with letting us, as the kind of Indigenous partner, lead in the conversation sometimes, and lead in the action, and lead in the direction, where that's not always the case, or that's not always an opportunity for Indigenous communities or Indigenous organizations in these type of kind of philanthropic or different investment spaces. So just want to kind of applaud Definity for that, kind of being true to those values and really walking the talk. And with that first round, I have one final question, and then I think we can go to some audience questions if we still have time. So we can kind of, just as an exercise, envision a dream Indigenous community investment landscape. So we're looking however many years into the future of Indigenous communities are thriving with the different types of investments that they need. The capital is there, the support is there. And it's really that vision, that dream that we all believe in and are working towards. And if each of you could share one essential element in maybe linking where we are today to getting to that dream state in the future. And maybe I'll start with MJ, James, and then Tamer. And just kind of what your essential element of what to get us to that dream state.
Thanks, Wahi. I also want to just recognize the amazing presentations of my colleagues. So inspiring. It's an honor to be able to hear what you are both working on the day to day. Thanks for the question, Wahi. I really appreciated that question. And I think I want to spend maybe 1 minute to just talk about an experience that we had together. Last year in November, we went to Denmark for a masterclass in type 2 diabetes reduction initiatives that are similar to what we do, but quite different because in different contexts. But something that I think impressed us and motivated us even more is to see how vibrant the social finance ecosystem was in Denmark and how well developed tools were and how everybody was working towards doing more efficiently and to scale up every initiative that was working. I came back with this conviction that we were able to do that here too, and that we're working towards it, but we're not exactly at the same place. So saying that it exists, the context is different, obviously, but saying all these tools being put to work was really illuminating. And I think the one thing I want to emphasize on for this question is I think I want to see more tools and policies being developed to really facilitate our work, to make it simple and easy, and to facilitate access to capital to Indigenous communities.
And if I can prod a little bit, so thinking about these different types of investment vehicles, investment models, could you tell us a bit about the kind of Indigenous Outcomes Fund and the Outcomes Fund model or Outcomes Finance model that Raven is working on a little bit more, and how that could be a good vehicle for change?
Absolutely. So we're working towards the construction of an outcomes fund, a first of its kind outcomes fund in Canada and probably in the world. And the idea is to pool capital together to be efficient when we launch our initiatives, so that we don't necessarily invest in specific projects, but that we have this large perspective on our work and vision, and really embedding our deals within the fund. And that also supports and facilitates government purchasing of outcomes and investors investing in a structure that is larger and structured to facilitate access. So we're in the process of opening the fund right now, and excited to have our fundraising launched. And we think it's going to be the ideal vehicle to really continue to do outcomes-based finance in our context.
Fantastic. So thinking about summarizing that, thinking about new vehicles, new models, some of which are already happening successfully with great success around the world. And part of that is just making that our own in our own communities, by our own values. So James, I'll let you go next. In your dream Indigenous community investment landscape, what is one element that we need to have to get us there? Oh, you're just on mute, James.
Thank you. Thanks, Wahi. I think this might be a little more short term, but what I see as being critical is overcoming fragmentation and collaboration. And I'll point to a government example, although I think in many ways we're mirrors of each other and it doesn't solely exist there. But I think when it comes to investing and taking clean energy projects, for example, I've seen investors' jaws drop when it comes to how many potential streams of revenue and support exist across a number of agencies, and this could be federal government and provincial government, and sometimes that can be a challenge as well. So I think in a dream landscape, that could consist of the ability to leverage all of these kinds of opportunities in a holistic way. And I find a lot of the work we do stems from that in terms of helping communities, businesses navigate that and coordinate that landscape, which can be a bit fragmented when it comes to the perspective from the bottom line. And I'd say we've had support from our philanthropic supporters on that, and I really echo what Tamara said about the work you've been doing, and I've noticed many of our partners are adjusting their lenses and trying to be more receptive to the perspective and long-term wishes of communities, of organizations, and also supporting the development of that. My perspective is often, yes, there have been gaps in philanthropy historically, and we're seeing so much innovation in Canada, and I hope that percolates globally in terms of what we do in those practices. And then just one more example, it's not just programming and grants, but to get back to the housing side, part of the business case that we're starting to see and develop is that if there was, I think, a greater recognition of the cost to provinces and territories from a healthcare perspective, getting back to that housing issue, there would be more collaboration. But structurally, we seem to have our blinders on a bit. So I think in that dream investment landscape, those kinds of barriers that inhibit collaboration would come down.
And I echo that completely. So at Raven, I have the privilege of working with a lot of our different partners in government, in the ecosystem, in different communities. And it is the joy of my life to bring so many people together and to kind of translate what everybody's saying to each other and allowing people to work together a little bit easier, and bringing people into one room who maybe wouldn't have been in that room together in the first place. So that's kind of that's my raison d'etre at Raven. And so I think that speaks to exactly what you're saying, is we need more people with that type of philosophy, more people with that approach, more people developing that skill set, more organizations adopting that, so that we can harness the power in the relationships that we could be having, tapping into different capacities, expertise, resources, de-risking things that seem risky just because you don't know each other or you don't know about it, sharing education, sharing experiences. So I wholeheartedly agree, and that hits home for me on many different levels. And Tamer, in your dream Indigenous community investment landscape, please illuminate us.
Yeah, I wanted to just touch on your earlier question on what's guiding our investment, to talk a little bit more about what's our dream Indigenous community investment landscape. But I think relationship building is obviously an essential aspect of our work, because our granting partners, we refer to our grantees as granting partners because we work in partnership with them, and it's a two-way road. They operate in a constantly shifting climate, so it often takes time for them to fully grasp and navigate the challenges they face, and as a result, we cannot expect them to meet our standards, submit standardized reports, or meet strict deadlines solely for the sake of fulfilling agreements or requirements. It needs to be more relational. Learning is a critical aspect. So when I started, again, I refer to it as a compliant fundraiser in the sector. I had limited knowledge about how a foundation operates on the inside, and I held this impression that they were all powerful and possessed extensive experience. However, fortunately, that perception has proven untrue, and I carry that work forward at Definity as a startup foundation. We're a learning foundation. Our focus lies in building relationship with communities, understanding their priorities, and actively engaging in philanthropic work that aligns both our needs. And so we prioritize collaborative relationship that empowers our grant makers to define their own metrics of success and enable us to understand and align with their unique perspectives and goals. But to your question, the one thing I envision is that foundations take guidance from Indigenous communities. Communities possess a deep understanding of their own priorities, culture, people, and needs, and foundations should not assume that what works as a best practice in one community will automatically translate into the best approach for another. So it's important for us to listen attentively, meet people where they are, and collaborate on finding solutions together. And the other thing is, if there are foundations on the call, if you represent a foundation, you probably know this, but I strongly encourage you to approach your support for communities with the utmost care. It's important to be mindful and considerate when engaging in communities with your grantees. Show up with compassion. don't show up as an authority figure, and be a genuine ally in the work. And the great thing about this is that it's well within our reach to do that. It just requires a willingness to learn and adapt. So I guess how I envision this is actually more so for the philanthropic sector to adapt.
Well, if I am building the dream Indigenous community investment landscape, I definitely want you all on board. So good thing you are on board, and good thing we are building it together. We have a few questions from the audience that I'll send over, or that I'll share before we have some time. We have 9 minutes. So the first question, and maybe MJ, you can speak to this. The experience of mixing kind of technical expertise, or a Western approach to, for example, medical or health-related dealings, combining that with traditional community knowledge, community practices, cultural knowledge. How does that work in Indigenous community investment? What is your experience with that? What are some challenges? What are some opportunities? And what's your perspective on how to go about doing that?
I think that's a great question. First, I'm going to start by saying that each community is different, and I think art needs to exist within the reality of each community, and it will transform and exist differently. But in my experience, I think what has been the most important tool is time and patience, so that people that come from different backgrounds have this space to learn from one another and listen and hear and understand each other. Being mindful of time and transforming how we consider achieving success and timelines is extremely important. So I don't know if it's an art, but it's definitely considering our usual timelines and objectives to achieve results differently, and to make sure that what's at the core of what we do is building relationships and trust and understanding, common understanding, and building decisions on consensus. And that requires, again, time. So it would be my main tool, and something that I continuously work on and relearn. But I think it's the most important part of this art. So I don't know if I mastered the art or if I be able to, draft an outline of what it looks like. But that's definitely the tools that I carry with me, and that I relearn are necessary to really create a place where everybody is able to bring their best practice, and to have those two realities work well together.
Absolutely. And different communities, as you said, have different ways of creating that balance already. So for example, where I come from, we follow the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which kind of outlines a little bit of that, how to find balance and how to strike balance. Other communities refer to it as 2-eye seeing. So a lot of how to create that balance in investments and in community work exists in knowledge holders and community members already. So it's a bit of tapping into what's the balance, how do we strike a balance for you? So thank you so much, MJ, for that wonderful answer. And next, one last question while we have a few minutes is, thinking about maybe a lack of human capital or a need for capacity building on the ground in community investments. Maybe James, you can speak a bit to this on how you approach that.
It's a great question. I think there are plenty of people working, particularly in the clean energy field, but it exists across Indigenous investment that feel like the human capital issue can't be overcome. So it feels like the pressures are forever with us. I think the most important thing is to remain optimistic and continue to keep our eyes towards the future. And that means, what are we doing to accelerate career paths, continue to keep the youth in mind, and be future ready in all of the decisions we're making. Part of the reason I'm optimistic is I look at my own community, and many communities have a similar story. Our graduation rates, for example, are so much higher than they were a few decades ago. I don't think we ever thought we'd get to where we are now. We have post-secondary, technical people educated. So just the education alone within our communities has improved so much. I think we should acknowledge that and be optimistic that things will improve. And the social issues on communities continue to be a drain. And I think we are impacted when we become close to trauma, see how that has affected people, affected, say, labor, affected projects, and it's a reality. But the truth is, when we have successful initiatives, the youth see that, and that changes everything. And I think it's not just Indigenous communities; it's a reality of society. When we see examples of success, we want to emulate them. And so I think that's why it's so worthwhile to spend the time. And sometimes that does mean starting with case studies, right? So for communities in Manitoba, before we try to roll this out nationwide, that's important. And it has an impact in the communities that are hard to measure. So we need to keep our eyes on that. What do we know about 10 years from now? And just add a bit more, it comes to having a reality check as well. Electrification means enormous changes, enormous investment in generation, and enormous changes to what we do on the demand side of energy that we're not really thinking or talking about now. So having a reality check so that we can say, 10 years from now, we want our youth to be thinking about these kinds of career paths and getting engaged. And it's so important on the Indigenous side because clean energy, but also some very relevant sectors are going to continue to require so much human capital. So it should be front in mind in all of our conversations.
Absolutely. And we have just 3 more minutes. So maybe, Tamara, I'll let you finish off with one question. But just thinking about how to ensure that your organizational culture or your team culture is really doing things in a good way, which is really, I could go into that of what it means to do things in a good way. From my teachings and my traditional knowledge, but how do you facilitate that? How do you allow that to grow? How do you allow that to blossom within the team so that you can continue to bring this to life?
I think the critical part is, and this has been at the start of at the inception of the foundation, is to lean on our allies. We've been fortunate enough to start building our foundation, our community investment framework on the shoulders of these incredible sector giants who were so wonderful, devoting their time and energy and attention on the sector in terms of investing in communities and saying, you know what, Definity, this is something that you need to pay careful attention to. One of them being, of course, is naming the population, our priority population, very intentionally in our communications and in our investment framework. So we support Black and Indigenous people and people of color. And saying that out loud, I think, is really critical at our foundation. But to also, as I mentioned earlier, is to continue to learn, to recognize that we can't be ingrained in a certain process just for the sake of, being a foundation. We have to be very mindful and adapt very quickly to the needs of community. So it's this active listening approach. I think that's going to be critical to our work, and will hopefully set the tone for the culture at Definity, and hopefully for other foundations along the way to support communities in a very meaningful and intentional way.
Thank you so much. And that wraps up our time today, but I really want to, from the depth of my heart, thank each of you, not only for being part of this panel and sharing your stories and your perspectives, but also for the good work that you're doing in all areas, both professionally and personally, as whole people. And it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of determination, it takes a lot of kind of late nights and early mornings and full days. But as I said, you are bringing this dream Indigenous community investment landscape to life every day. Brick by brick, we're building it. And I just want to say, Yamagoa, and until next time.
Thank you, Wahi. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, MJ. Thanks, James.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.